Alrighty, so for today's video, I'm going to start by asking a question, and I honestly do not know the answer to this question. And I'm going to apologize before I ask, because one of the things I've tried to do with this channel, and one of my goals, is I don't want this to become a political channel. I don't want this to be a channel where, we only show one side of things and we kind of dog the other side, yada, yada, yada. And I don't want to be accused of that. The problem is sometimes you have to call out a certain group of people, and there's just no other way around it. So the question that I have for you today is, why do the Democrats in the United States nationwide appear to want an impotent and ineffective law enforcement across the country? I don't know the answer to that question. The only thing I can tell you is that from everything that I've seen, at least over the last couple of years, goes to kind of show that outcome. The thing that I find most unfortunate about this is that obviously this is not something that the majority of people I don't know if I can say that. I'll say there are a lot of people, and I don't like to say that certain people are Republicans or Democrats. I think unless you are an actual politician running for office, you do not belong to a party. What I'll say is that the number of people who are voting for Republicans, or the number of people who are voting for Democrats, and typically do so on a consistent basis. One of the really unfortunate things that I've witnessed is people will say to me, or they'll write down in the comments of my videos, they'll say something to the effect of, I'm a Democrat and I don't support this kind of stance against the police. I see a lot of people making that comment. So in my opinion, I think it's a fair criticism to say that nationwide, the Democrats are, as a political party, have made some very serious mistakes in their stance against law enforcement across the country. Today I have a couple of examples that would illustrate kind of my stance on this. The first of which is this whole fiasco that happened down on the border. This was a couple weeks ago, where there was some pictures that came out, and this isn't the one. I don't know. Here we go. I think this is the picture that really got people riled up. And it was people who looked at this picture and started sharing it online were saying that the Border Patrol was on horseback whipping immigrants as they try to come into the country. The most unfortunate part about this is that the photographer who took these pictures and took video of the incident even came out and said, no, that's not what the Border Patrol was doing. The horses are a very effective tool for the Border Patrol, particularly along these river access points, because horses can go places that a truck cannot go. Horses can go places that an ATV cannot go. I don't know if you've ever tried to ride a four-wheeler over some rocks or through a river, but it's not something that's easy for a horse, but a horse can do it much more effectively than you can on any other type of vehicle. Plus, these guys, when they're on horseback, the horses know the intent of the rider. They've been training together for a long time. And a lot of times the horses, they know what the goal is, and they look at their human that's on top of them as their partner. So the guy on top can kind of lean and give the horse an idea of where he wants to go. But usually the horse already knows. So the rider, in this case is a Border Patrol agent, he can just do his job from a platform, and that platform is taking him where he needs to go. He doesn't need to have his hands on the handlebars and all that stuff like you would on a four-wheeler. So this is a very effective tool to stop people from crossing the border. And regardless of your stance on whether or not we should be accepting more or fewer immigrants into this country, I think everybody should agree that having these mass migrations with tens of thousands of people crossing the border at a particular point at the same time is not a good thing. And we need an effective Border Patrol to be able to prevent that stuff from happening. But here's the headline. U.S. Border Patrol will no longer use horses in the Del Rio, Texas, after outrage over treatment of Haitian migrants. They did nothing wrong. They were not mistreating these people at all. What the problem was, there was outrage over a tool that they were using by a bunch of people who don't understand how law enforcement effectively uses their tools. And that's the problem. So you have politicians making decisions that make these guys less effective. I have more examples. This is more locally. Everybody remembers the riots that occurred in the summer of 2020. The response to those riots across the country was different on every city kind of handled it a little bit differently. I can tell you that here in Columbus, the officers initially responded to these people who were congregating downtown, blocking roads, harassing. Well, they were smashing windows. They were lighting buildings on fire. They were stopping vehicles. There were people pulled out of vehicles and beaten in the middle of the street. The response from the police was they declared, and from the city, the mayor actually instituted a curfew across the whole city. I think people had to be in by 10 p.m. And then everybody who was found out during downtown was presumed guilty of rioting. What the officers did to clear the streets is they used tear gas. Tear gas is a very effective tool to peacefully disperse crowds. The problem is, for reasons unknown to me, let's put it that way, the mayor decided that tear gas, while it was effective, was too brutal of a tool that was being used by law enforcement. So he put down an order that said you can no longer use tear gas. So now what the officers were forced to do was meet these people head to head and use brute force. So the video that I have queued up is going to show officers on bicycles dismount their bicycles and literally use their bikes to ram people. And these peaceful citizens came prepared with shields made of plywood that they were using to push back against the officers. And while these guys pushed back against the officers, people behind the officers were throwing things like rocks and frozen water bottles at them. So the officers had to beat people down with their bicycles. They had to physically grab onto people. People were stepped on. People were injured. People were maced at point blank range because the officers were doing everything that they could to clear the streets, but unfortunately, their tools were taken away. Now, here's a little bit of the footage.
Dan, mark 9. Mark 9! Taking rocks. Back up!
So what do you think is a more peaceful way to clear demonstrators from a roadway? Do you think it's more peaceful to throw some gas out there, make them cough, make their nose run a little bit, and have them run from the area? Or do you think it's better that officers use steel frame bicycles and ram into them repeatedly, causing injuries and bruises, and then spraying them in the face directly within inches of their face with mace so that it goes not just on their face, but into their eyes, under their eyelids, and it's going to take hours upon hours to clear out. One of the most brilliant things about this particular tactic of telling the officers that they can't use gas any longer was that the officers were unable to clear out large areas and unable to deny areas because, one officer with tear gas can sit there and throw gas down a street and deny people access to that street. It's almost like a force multiplier. But since the officers didn't have those tools, when people ran up on a small group of officers, for instance, the officer was forced to use a different level of force. Sometimes it was mace, and sometimes they had to go hands-on, physically running out on the road and tackling people. The reward for those officers who had their tools taken away was that the city hired multiple law firms, paid them, between all of them, close to $1 million to investigate the uses of force that the police had. And now we have 3 police officers in the city of Columbus that have been criminally charged for uses of force that occurred during the riot when they were simply responding, trying to do their job, but they had been handicapped by local politicians. So what happens when you take away the tools that law enforcement can use to be effective? You make them less effective. And it's really unfortunate that the people who make these law enforcement officers less effective will then turn around and criticize the actions taken by the officers that they were forced to do by the politicians making those decisions. If you think that through, you'll understand why a great number of police officers across the country don't feel safe doing their job. And the people that they're most afraid of are not the people on the streets with guns. It's the people who are trying to put them in jail for simply doing their job when they're doing their job while their most effective tools have been taken away. Because for some reason, the majority of the Democrats who are in charge in this country have made it their stated goal to make law enforcement impotent and less effective. So those are my thoughts for today. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.